Welcome to the Daily Surrender, a space for real, raw, and vulnerable conversations about what it truly means to live in alignment with God's design. I'm Jennifer Ragazzo, a soul-aligned wellness coach who is far from perfect and still figuring out this whole human experience, just like you. Here we talk about the messy, the beautiful, and everything in between as we learn to let go, trust more, and step into the peace and freedom that's already waiting for us. Let's dive in. Welcome back to the Daily Surrender, where we explore what it means to let go of control and live aligned with divine flow. Today, I want to dive into a real life story as we explore what it means to really stay centered in chaos. Because let's be real, this life comes with some chaos. Sometimes it's small little chaos, and sometimes they're really big trials. But regardless of what it is that's coming across our path, we really can find peace when life doesn't go as planned. So today's episode was inspired from a real life story of my own, one of those everyday type of disruptions that could have very easily sent me spiraling into anxiety and frustration and woe is me. And it definitely would have done that in my past. So this past weekend, we had a Saturday on our calendar that was the first Saturday in a really long time where we were completely free. And the Ragazzo households, the months of May into June are always a lot. 4 out of the 5 of us celebrate birthdays. It was my 50th birthday. We threw in some extras this year with my youngest daughter's graduation. My son was home for a very short period of time before leaving again for his summer internship in a different state. So we were really looking forward to a day of not really having a lot in our calendar. And my husband and I were in our basement working out, and I thought to go look in our basement chest freezer to pull some meat out for dinner that night. And I go open the top of the chest freezer and I look in and I wanted to throw up. The freezer had died probably days earlier, and I was staring at what had to be thousands of dollars worth of defrosted meat. It was stocked full, and we'd been stockpiling for a while, full of grass-fed, pasture-raised, organic, all the things meats, mostly from Wild Pastures. No, they are not a sponsor of this podcast, but they have really good meat. And I looked down, and upon realizing that at least half of that meat had to be thrown in the garbage, and the other half I had to cook or throw it in the garbage, I looked down and I took a pause and I took a deep breath and I really grounded myself. In that moment, I thought, I have 2 choices right now. I can feed the disappointment, anger, frustration, anxiety, all the things, or I can feel them and not attach myself to them and stay calm and peaceful and handle what is. So, as we go forward in this podcast, the podcast itself is not about meat. It really is about how we respond when life throws us a curveball. So whether it's a freezer, whether it's a flat tire, or something far more painful like losing a loved one or losing a job, the invitation is always the same, my friends. Will we stay anchored in peace, or will we get swept up in our panic? So let's go back to my freezer story. Here's what happened. So again, we opened it up. We found that half of our meat had to be thrown in the garbage. After taking my deep breath and recentering myself and making a choice, again, making my choice. Am I going to remain in peace or am I going to spiral? We cannot live in woulda, coulda, shoulda. There's absolutely no point whatsoever in woulda, coulda, shoulda-ing. I made that word up. I easily could have beaten myself up. Why didn't I check earlier? It's a really old chest freezer. This isn't the first time that it's blown a fuse. Or just perseverated on the loss of the money and all the things. But I chose not to do that. I really did choose to stay in peace. So I looked at my husband and I said, okay, let's handle this. First of all, we're going to offer up gratitude. Thank you, God, that we had the day. If it had happened the weekend prior, we would have been at graduation. If it had happened next weekend, it would be dance recital weekend. So we had the day. So we anchored ourselves in gratitude. He went upstairs, he got some garbage bags, and we rolled up our sleeves and we started taking inventory. We sifted through the meat. We put the meat that we did not feel comfortable consuming because it was on the top, and who knows how long it was sitting like that. We put that in the garbage. That was in the garbage bag. And as I was putting it in the garbage bag, I literally was saying to myself, let it go. Let it go. Do not give meaning to this. Let's not feed into any negative emotions around it. It just is what is. We cannot always change our circumstances, but what we can affect is how we perceive them and what we do with them. So as we're doing that, my husband and I started looking for good. And we said, you know what? We've always hated this chest freezer. It is inconvenient to have meats stacked up upon each other. And we go down there and we look for a packet of ground beef and it's at the bottom and we have to dig and dig and dig. We've wanted to replace it for years, but it was working. And why spend the money, right? And we also had not taken inventory of what was in there and things were getting stacked up. So we also added to the list of good. Well, this is forcing us to take inventory. This is forcing us to get rid of this crappy chest freezer. So we offered up gratitude. And I can tell you that when we can find the good in absolutely any situation, that changes our experience, that changes our energetic vibration. Gratitude is a really high vibrating emotion. Frustration, anger, really low vibrating emotions. Vastly different experience. So, as I mentioned earlier, in the past, old me, I would not have done any of that. Old me would have really allowed this experience to ignite frustration and stress and anger. And I would be bossy and controlling in this whole situation, which would make my husband and I tense and most likely fighting with one another as we still had to handle all this meat. So instead, this time, I literally chose not to freak out. I didn't spiral into why me? Why did this happen? And I didn't feed the storm in front of me. Instead, again, I chose to calmly pivot. It's a pivoting. I ended up spending the remainder of the day, 8 hours of the day, cooking and prepping. I looked up online. I made a list of all the meals that I could make with the meat after we took inventory of the meat that we could save. I knew that if I were to cook it, I could then refreeze it. And what I said to myself was, this is a good thing. First of all, again, going back to gratitude. Thankfully, I have the time. It was not my preference. It was not my preference to spend my day like this, but I could still be very grounded and rooted in peace. I could still stay calm in my center. I was grateful for that too, because again, not something I would have done in years past, but because of the work that I continue to do on myself to ground and root myself in peace, I was staying peaceful. I said, okay, we're going to have a day of meal prepping. And I sat there and I made my list and I was extra grateful for the internet. I was really grateful for people who have all kinds of blog posts on freezer meals. So I made a list And my husband ran to the store to get any extra ingredients that I needed. And I put on music and I started to cook. And I continued, even when I was tired or I felt a little bit of frustration creeping up, I would continue to pivot myself back into being grateful. I would look at the meals that I was prepping and I would say to myself, future me is going to thank me. Future me is going to be so happy when I can pull out a meal on a really busy night. And in doing this, underneath all of the chaos that was my kitchen that day, there was this really quiet peace. And again, the peace was not because the situation was ideal. That was not my preference. Again, not my preference. There are so many things in this life that we can stand and take a look at and say, well, this isn't my preference, but I'm not going to tether myself to it. My friends, this, what I'm experiencing that I'm sharing here with you, this for me is the fruit of years of learning how to surrender. That is why I started this podcast so that I can share the things that I've learned along the way, my tips and tricks and tools that I have embodied, really, truly embodied to get me to where I am today. And I'm human. It is a daily practice. Again, why this podcast is called The Daily Surrender. So, why does all of this matter? Now, a broken freezer might not really sound like a big deal. And in the grand scheme of life, it's not a big deal. But you see, it's the little things in life that prepare us for the bigger ones. So, how we show up in the midst of these mini disruptions is often how we'll show up in the massive ones. The big ones like grief, losing a loved one, chronic illness, betrayal, financial loss. Because the truth is, we will all experience chaos in this life. We will face circumstances that are outside of our control, but we always, always will get to choose our internal response. So the external circumstances may not be our preference. They may have come out of left field and blindsided us, but, and we don't always get to choose those, but we do get to choose the internal response. And that in and of itself is so empowering. We're looking for empowerment here in this life. We're looking to step up and out of victimhood and into that empowered state of being a creator. So for me, this has been a very slow and sacred unraveling. I didn't read one book that completely changed my life and changed my habit and changed my thought patterns. I have repeatedly showed up and applied the different things that I've learned over time. And it's led to me having a day like I had this past weekend with a freezer full of defrosted meat and still being peaceful. I had to learn how to anchor myself in God as my source, my source of everything that I need instead of the outcomes of my life. I had to learn how to flow with what is rather than really resist what I thought shouldn't be. I had a lot of shoulds in my life, and I had a list of things that I thought shouldn't be. Or these things would happen, like the freezer defrosting all of the meat. I would get so focused on why that shouldn't have happened for a whole variety of reasons that I would get knocked out of flow. I would stop relying on God, the divine that is within, as my one true power, as my source. And I would start giving power away to other things. Michael Singer has one of my favorite books that I've read many times is called The Untethered Soul. And in The Untethered Soul, Michael Singer so beautifully writes about this whole idea of not clinging to, not resisting, but allowing life to flow through us and letting the energy of our reactions move through without attaching our identity to it. That's a big thing. I highly recommend his book. But the whole idea behind that is we do want to feel the emotions. I wasn't suppressing any emotion on Saturday. Of course, I was disappointed. Of course, there was frustration. Of course, there was even a little bit of anger in the fact that the freezer died. So I allowed myself to feel the things, but because I didn't tether myself to them and make them who I was, like really identify with them, I just let them flow up and out. And I kept my identity really, really rooted in God, in my source, in the divine that is within. And it's because of that that I remained in peace. But I also didn't shove it all down and not feel the things, because when we shove it all down, we create emotional congestion. So there's a cost to clinging. So let's talk about that. When we resist what is, when we focus on the problem and amplify the frustration, we don't just create emotional turmoil. We create inflammation in our bodies. I have been working with people for well over a decade on their overall health and wellness as a coach. I have integrated applied functional medicine and naturopathy and integrative nutrition. I can read blood work. I can see different points of interconnectedness in the human body all over. But I can tell you this, after, again, over a decade of working with people on their health and wellness, these emotions that can get trapped in our body, whether they're frustration or anger or anxiety, us spiraling in and focusing on the negative, that in and of itself is one of the biggest root cause drivers of inflammation. There is not a supplement for that. What we're talking about here today and on all of these podcast episodes, this here is one of the best ways to create ease and flow in the body. Dis-ease is when our body is out of ease. So when we feed the anxiety, we spin into scarcity and we become energetically dis-eased. And for what? Why are we doing that? Will our worry change our outcome? Will our anger bring, for instance, the meat back? Like, would my anger have brought the meat back? No. Will our stress heal the situation? No. These are great questions to pause and ask ourselves when we're in a situation, when the chaos arrives. Take a purposeful pause and actually ask ourselves these three questions. Like, would my worry right now in this situation change this outcome? Will me getting really angry over this right now, is that going to actually change what is? Is the stress that I'm starting to feel right now going to actually help my situation or hinder my situation? So ask yourself those questions. And for me, when I asked myself those questions the other day, my answer was no. It will only deplete me. And I'm not available for that anymore. Again, I've done enough work on myself in really, really, really deep ways to understand that I am no longer available for leaking out my energy. I am really keenly aware of the things that deplete me. And fueling stress is depleting. And that's why here, the practice, that's why I'm teaching you this. And I talk about this on our podcast episodes. The practice of surrender is not just spiritual, it's also biological. So emotional inflammation will lead to physical inflammation. I see it again and again and again. I just met with a new client today and we were diving into her health history. And I was looking at all the things from her intake form to her lab work, as well as asking her a lot of questions about her emotional state, her spiritual state, the thoughts that are in her head, the things that feel very congested and limiting. And it was as clear as day to me that some of the physiological markers that we're seeing and some of her physiological symptoms are very, very rooted in her emotional inflammation. And obviously, we will be working on that and diving deep into that. The more that we feed the stress response, the more that we dysregulate our nervous system. And a dysregulated nervous system, my friends, is one of the biggest drivers of disease. Again, there are no supplements you can take to regulate your nervous system. We can take some adaptogenic herbs that can help bring a little bit of temporary calm, but that's not solving the solution. Surrender isn't passive. It's powerful. It's protective. It's a choice to stay rooted and not panic. So, as always on this podcast, I'm going to give you some simple steps to really practice your own daily surrender. So, some simple ways that we can begin to practice again. It is a practice. I did not get where I am today, calm in chaos, overnight. Absolutely not. I just turned 50. This has been a journey for me, a very conscious and intentional journey. So we can use the everyday forum of life and the smallest of things, the smallest little daily disruptions as a forum to practice. So the first one is pause and breathe. Our breath is truly one of the fastest and easiest ways to move out negative stuck energy. So when we pause and breathe, we can pause before we react. And then we can take a deep breath and we can recenter. We can ask ourselves some questions. We can place our hands on our heart and we can ask, what would peace choose right now in this moment? And then get quiet and still. There's no rush. The answer will come to you. Number two, we can name and release the emotion. We can feel it, but not feed it. So we can say, I'm feeling really frustrated, and that's okay, but I choose not to dwell here. Emotions are energy. Let them move. Energy needs to move, but don't make them your home. The third thing you can ask, what is this here to teach me? Why is this here? How is this for me? Even in small challenges, ask yourself, what's the invitation? Often the lesson is to trust, to flow, have flexibility. Perhaps it's deeper presence. You're being invited to stay in the here and the now and in this moment. The fourth one is return to your anchor. So we have to learn what is our anchor. It might be very different for you than it is for me. And you may not even know what anchor is good for you until you've experimented and practiced. So whether it's prayer or breath work, reading scripture, listening to some music, getting really still, stepping outside and putting your feet on the grounds, whatever it is that's going to help you to return to the divine that is within. Find your anchor and return to it and remind yourself that God is my source and peace is my power. and everything that I need is within me. The last one that I want to share with you is to celebrate your growth. Celebrate your growth. After the storm passes, and it will, temporary moment in time, reflect. Did I handle it differently than I would have before? Acknowledge and celebrate your evolution. It is so important for us to celebrate because when we pause and we look back and we celebrate even the little small micro changes of growth and evolution in our overall well-being, we are reinforcing the good. We're reinforcing our ability to pivot, our ability to stay calm in chaos. You want to celebrate that. Celebrate yourself. You're worth celebrating. So, my prayer for you as you learn to walk through this life, not immune to trials, but unshaken by them, is that you stop tethering your peace to preferences and you start rooting it in presence, divine presence. So the next time your version of the freezer breaks, pause, breathe, and surrender. Because the more that you practice in the small things, the more prepared you'll be for the big ones. And in that surrender, you will find everything that you're longing for. You will find peace. You will find power. You will find freedom. That alone has me, just feeling more of all of that. And I hope you are too on the other end of this podcast. So, if today's episode spoke to you, I would love for you to share it with a friend who might be walking through some chaos right now. And perhaps you're someone who is desiring to get more anchored and rooted and get better at this so that you can bring down the overall inflammation in your body and you can live in more peace and you can stay more centered in chaos, and you are desiring a guide by your side. If that's the case, you can apply to work with me. I work with clients in a variety of different ways, whether it's one-on-one coaching, guiding and freedom journeys, or my group program, which is reopening at the end of the summer, the Vibrant Rise Functional Wellness Collective. The links are in the show notes. You can share this podcast with anybody on Apple, Spotify, or YouTube. And if you haven't yet, can you please leave a review? It helps this message reach so many more souls who are really longing to and are ready to surrender and live in the divine flow of peace. Until next time, my friends, may you walk gently, breathe deeply, and surrender fully. Thank you for joining me on the Daily Surrender. If today's episode spoke to you, I'd love to hear your reflections. Send me a message, share this with a friend, or leave a review. Remember, true healing and freedom come when we let go, surrender, and trust that God's way is so much better than our way. Until next time, my friends, keep surrendering, keep rising, and keep walking in peace.